It is time to determine the best crunchy Euro game of all time. Welcome to another edition of the Board Game Deathmatch, where 30 brave competitors, 31 brave board games, take to the ring with only one emerging victorious, and the rest are completely burnt to a crisp. That's right. It is the highest stakes board game competition out there. And we are going to get into it, but first, I want to give a shout out to Kung Fu Poker, who is sponsoring the channel and this video, because that's what I decided to do this week. This might be the last ad you see on the channel. This might not if they find any value from me whatsoever, which I don't think they're going to, but who knows? What is Kung Fu Poker? Let's cue the music and read the script one last time. Because I gotta let you know that Kung Fu Poker is a beginner-friendly free Texas Hold'em app that you can play anytime, anywhere with 100% play money. You get to compete with real players and enjoy the excitement of winning within minutes, or the devastation of losing if you're horrible. Log in daily to unlock free chips, spins, and more. Because who doesn't love a poker game that's realistic for beginners to thrive? And make sure you use the code CHRIS to get 30,000 bonus chips, which is probably all you ever need, and might get them to sponsor the channel again, so I can continue making content for you all, because it's dependent. It's dependent on you clicking the link in the description. Otherwise, the channel goes under. This is our last-ditch effort. So click the link in the description, use my code, do whatever you want. Now let's get into this tournament. And if you're unfamiliar with these deathmatch tournaments, it is something that I've been doing since January. We take a theme, and then all throughout the month, we vote on games in that theme, in a bracket-style tournament. And this month's bracket, or I should say August's bracket, which is just finished up, was all about crunchy Euro games, sinking your teeth into the delightful strategic elements that only Euro games and Euro designers can provide. There's no randomness here, there's no theme other than gardening. Oh, there's a bit, but really not that much. There's nothing to latch onto but pure, beautiful mechanics. And these are the brave contenders. These are the 31 games that will be pitting off in a battle to the death, where the losers will be burnt. And I own some of these games, and I really, really like some of these games. I'm a Euro player at heart, I think. I love mechanics. I love that puzzle that comes from it. I love sitting down for a 2 to 3 hour game and just really having this battle of wits. It's very exciting to me. And so my patrons put forward the suggestions of the games, and I threw in a couple of my own to create this tournament bracket. Because there were 31 days in August, that means we can have 31 games, because we start on the 1st and finish on the 31st in terms of voting. So you'll see up there there's an empty space that might be cut off just because of the framing, and that's Energy Empire. So Energy Empire randomly got the bye to the tournament. And I've also listed the complexity rating. And so when I was figuring out this competition and whittling down which 31 would battle it out, I had a few considerations. One, I tried to leave off games that have already participated in previous deathmatch tournaments. We've been doing, this is the 8th one now. Wow, time flies. There are a few that could have made their way in here and didn't, because I wanted to talk about new games on the channel. And then 2, I also judged their inclusion by variety, how many times they were mentioned and suggested on Patreon, and then threw in a couple of my own that I thought were fun. But when there was a tie, or I had a couple tiebreakers, wasn't sure which way to go, I tried to veer to the more complex games, although there is kind of a wide variety here. So those are my 2 criteria. That should give you enough time to have looked over the list and thought about which games you think are going to win, and make your predictions down below, because I know how it's going to turn out. Maybe, unless something changes. But I like seeing what your predictions are. Who do you think was snubbed? Let me know that as well, because I'll probably create a snubbed bracket at some point. And then people can rejoice and upvote you down in the comments and say, yes, you're right, this deathmatch is a sham. Let's riot and burn YouTube to the ground. Which you'd probably be justified in doing so. So now that we've gotten the preamble out of the way, let's get right into the tournament. For those who are unfamiliar, I should mention that the voting takes place over on the private Room and Board Discord, and everybody who's participating gets 1 extra vote, and that extra vote is only considered cashed in if the game that you voted on moves forward. So you can use that extra vote to throw your support behind games that you think deserve the support without the fear that you're going to waste it, basically. I usually talk a little bit more in the first round to give everyone an overview of the games, and then we move on to the next round, the round of 16. We'll be able to really accelerate things and keep the pace going, and the death matches flying, and the matches flying, and the burninating. So let's get into the first round, Dominant Species Marine versus Underwater Cities. And Dominant Species Marine is a game that I'm excited about because it is appearing in the World Series of Board Gaming happening end of September, which, if you don't know, I am involved in, and so I'm excited. And so in Dominant Species Marine, each player will assume the role of one of the 4 different ocean species. And the game is all about trying to become the dominant species as we move from marine life into life on this planet. So you might be reptiles, you might be the fish, you might be the cephalopod, you might be the crustacean. And in the Board Game Geek description they say, through wily action pawn placement, which is like worker placement, but you're just not in as much competition. The goal is to attempt to thrive in as many different climates and habitats as possible so that you can claim different card effects, basically. And what's really exciting about Dominant Species Marine is the asymmetry here. Because you are these different species and you all have these different traits that you get to decide at the beginning of the game that help you break the rules and shift the rules in different ways, it's this really big experience that is going to take you quite a long time to play and has that delicious crunch to it. But it's up against Underwater Cities. And Underwater Cities is a game that I've had on my radar for quite some time, actually. I think it looks cool and I've heard really good things about it. And the primary mechanic of that one is card placement. There'll be these colors around the board. And if you play the correct card color in that spot, you'll get to choose, yes, speaking about dominant species, who's the dominant species around here? And so if you match that card's color, you get to take both the action on the card and the advantage of going in that particular space. So you want to strategically use this card placement to come out on top. And this wasn't a surprise to me. Dominant Species Marine, I think, might be a little too crunchy and also potentially a little bit too new to move forward in this competition, as Underwater Cities wins in a 15-8 vote. Next crunch, we've got Caverna, Crunchverna versus Trickerion. Trickerion, tricky little magic people. One of those is the correct pronunciation. Caverna is a game by Uwe Rosenberg. It is the spiritual successor of Agricola, where you take everything that you can do in Agricola, and then you also add in some caves. So you can grow your cave and build your buildings in your cave and outfit it, or you can tend to your fields and raise vegetables, kind of do everything that you would do in Agricola, while removing the card play of Agricola. That's all kind of dependent on buildings now, and everyone has access to them, so it makes it, if you just get a lucky draw and you get all the good cards, well, you can't use that excuse anymore as to why you lost Caverna. And then Trickerion is a game by Mind Clash Games, where you play as a team of illusionists trying to become the best team of illusionists out there. In Trickerion, you're going to have simultaneous action selection and worker placement mechanics where you're going to choose what cards you place down before anybody's moved, and then you'll assign your workers to various spots in the hopes of getting more and more fame points, basically. You're going to level up your magicians, learn new tricks, perform tricks at the theater. Everybody has a day of the week that they can claim, and there are benefits to claiming different days. There are benefits to having your people sitting in the back row as well, because then they can be like adding trick tokens to cards and just like influencing it, basically turning the lights off when nobody's looking so that you can disappear. That's how I interpret it thematically. And the theme of Trickerion really gets me excited. I've played Caverna. I really enjoy Caverna, and I've played it with Zach, who is also on the Discord, and he made a comment that he loves Caverna and he was voting for Trickerion just because of the weight of Caverna. Little did he know that it's a similar sort of space and time hog, Zach. Sorry about it. But along with Zach, the people have spoken, and Trickerion moves forward in an 18-7 vote. Actually, a 19-6 vote when it was called. When I was checking now, somebody had swapped their vote back. Retroactively trying to change the course of history. Sorry, you can't do that here. There will be no time shenanigans allowed in this death match. Next up, we have Clans of Caledonia versus Lisboa. Or Lisboa, if you're nasty. And Clans of Caledonia is an economic game set in 19th century Scotland, where Scotland was making the transition from agricultural to industry, basically. or a country that relied on exports and imports with like linen and sheep and whiskey. And so that's what you are attempting to do in this game. You are taking on the role of varied clans, somewhat asymmetrical clans, on this modular board with 16 configurations, and you are attempting to import and export goods better than everybody else. You want to be the #1 clan in Scotland. Now it's up against Lisboa, which is by Vital Lacerda, and honestly, every single Vital Lacerda game could be included in this list. I chose ones that haven't already seen traction, and so that's why Kanban EV and On Mars, they aren't here because they've been in previous death matches. So let's see how Lisboa stacks up. And Lisboa, you're trying to reconstruct Lisboa after a giant earthquake in 1775, and you are going to either play a card into your display or replace a card in your display, and you're trying to manipulate the state of the board. But there are set places where everything has to go because the city planning committee has already determined that, and so you're just trying to manipulate it in the best way that you can. And I do love that you're not playing for fame points or whatever, you're just playing for wigs. You want to have the most wigs, and I just think that aspect alone is very funny. And Clans of Caledonia is one that I'm very excited to play as well. My friend Matt owns this. We should really play it soon, and especially soon before it's burned, because Lisboa moves on in a 13-9 vote. I could spend hours talking about all of these games. Just know that they're all crunchy, and I think if you've heard of them, or the theme sort of appeals to you, or the little tidbits appeal to you, I think latch on to that and look further into the ones that you want, or look further into all of these, because honestly, this is a great bracket where I think every single one I would be very excited to play right now. And speaking of two more that I'm excited to play, we have Pax Pamir versus Keyflower. In Pax Pamir, you're going to take on the role of Afghan leaders trying to form a new state after the collapse of the Durrani Empire, whenever that was. I should know, I'm a quarter Lebanese. But Pax Pamir is also designed by Cole Worley, who designed Root as well. And you're going to be purchasing cards from a central market and placing them in front of you in this single row called your court, and then you're going to use your court and the abilities that you get to manipulate the state of the board, shifting influence in a variety of the sectors. There is that area control management aspect to it, but there's also this tableau builder that you have to think about. And then Keyflower, which I do own and really enjoy playing. I actually stopped playing this on Board Game Arena because I enjoy it so much in person, and I don't want to get too good at it, or I don't want to overplay it. Because I find with a lot of these, the learning curve is fairly steep, that if you're really good at it and the people who you're playing it with are new to it, there could be a disparate element of fun if everyone's not invested. And so Keyflower is really fun. You're going to play over the course of 4 seasons, and each season you will use these workers of 3 colors to bid on different tiles. And if you win that bid, you will then add it to your specific city. And so you have a choice later on to either use your workers to bid on tiles or to play them on different spots in various people's cities. And if you play them on your own, you get to keep those workers, whereas the ones that you use to bid will be gone forever. Or if you play it on someone else's, they get to keep those workers. So there's a trade-off of, do I really use that spot, or do I go and try to block them? Each color also determines which color can be placed on that tile. So if I place 1 yellow meeple here and you only have red meeples, you can no longer use this space. You could add more yellow meeples, but you couldn't use red meeples. It's really, really fun. Unfortunately, it is burned to a crisp. It was a close vote. It was 10-8 for Pax Pamir, but Keyflower burns and Pax Pamir moves on. Next up, we have Barrage versus Pret-a-Porter, or Pret-a-Porter if you're a heathen. Now, Barrage is by Cranial Creations, by the same designers as Grand Austria Hotel and Lorenzo Il Magnifico, which you'll see later on in the bracket, or parts of the team at least. And this is one of the highest complexity ones, I think, in the tournament. And the whole concept is that you're going to be building these separate waterways or these electrical engines and using the energy of the water to power and gain points and gain resources and whatever, but then the water will continue to flow down the stream eventually and get to your competitors. And so it's all about planning that flow of water. How can you divert the water and use the water the most yourself and really just dry out your opponents? It's not going to dry out because it is water and it will go through eventually, but you have to manage this element while also maintaining your own machinery, etc., etc. And Pret-a-Porter is all about fashion. It's ready to wear. You're going to have basically 4 fashion shows over the course of the game, and in each fashion show you're trying to gain acclaim and stars and renown as your incredible renown of design sweeps out the competition. And then, of course, if your designs are more renowned, you can sell them for more and more money. That's why people sell single white t-shirts for $150. That's dumb. And that's all because of someone winning at Pret-a-Porter. There's direct ramifications for these sorts of things, really. But yeah, it's this big fashion one. It's in the top 1,000 of Board Game Geek. It's 636, but unfortunately it doesn't have the cachet to topple what is currently BGG's number 37, Barrage. There's a lot of solo players in the Discord, and they were saying that both of these games have really solid solo elements as well, if you're interested. But Barrage manages to just sweep Pret-a-Porter underwater in an 11-9 vote. Maybe they'll survive the burning, maybe not. Who knows? All right, let's keep it moving. For the next round, we have Vinhos, or Vinhos, if you're nasty, versus just Trajan. It's Trajan. Vinhos is a... oh my goodness. Who knows? Is another game by Vital Lacerda, who is known for these crunchy, heavy Euro games. You want to be developing your wines to be the greatest wines out there, so you get a ton of money and a ton of profit. That's it. What's kind of cool is that you can exchange your wines for either money or victory points, and so you have that decision that's kind of prevalent throughout the game of when do you take your points and when do you take more engine building material, basically, and funnel that money back into your producing better wine. And Trajan is a game that I hate. I don't hate, but I'm just really awful at. It's by Stefan Feld, and the reason I'm awful at it is because its primary mechanic is this rondelle. You have a number of different colored cubes in the rondelle, and you choose to pick up all of the cubes and move them Mancala style around. Wherever you land on, you get to take the action of that thing. And so you have 7 actions, and you're planning out which actions you want to take, and all of the actions, honestly, even if you didn't have this rondelle mechanic and you just had these actions, they all do different things in a variety of ways that it feels like it would be a complete game without the rondelle mechanic. But they throw that in because you can match up the colors in this little mini game, and if you do, you get additional bonus tiles that you can then chain and do better things with. It's a very tough game, but it was pretty fun, and it's one that I don't want to play again, but I would. You know, I do want to play again. And this one was pretty close. Again, I really like these tight votes. This one ended in a 10-8 vote. And thankfully, I never have to play Trajan again because it is on fire. Sorry, Matt. My friend Matt also has the copy of Trajan that we played. I ain't playing it again. And Vinhos, moves on to the next round. I know I could take the time to just look up how to pronounce it, but where would the fun be in that? I would never deprive you all laughing at me and telling me the correct way of pronouncing Vinhos, which henceforth it shall be named. Anyway, moving on to our next round, which is Great Western Trail versus Tigris and Euphrates. These are 2 games that I own. These are 2 games that I really enjoy. Great Western Trail is kind of a deck builder. You're going to be collecting different types of cows and then moving along this trail and using these cows to get more money and build more buildings with your money, and then shuttle the cows off and show them off to further and further places along the train track. And then you're going to repeat it and do it all over again. It's really neat. The 2nd edition has recently just come out. They're going to be coming out with alternate maps, basically, and just tweaks on the formula. Although, honestly, what I've seen by the Argentina, or whatever the 2nd version of this new Great Western Trail trilogy that they're putting out, it doesn't seem different enough for me to actually want to pull the trigger on both, just from my tertiary look at it. But it's up against Tigris and Euphrates, which is currently out of print, but it will come back in print at some point. Let's be real. Don't spend the stupid prices on this very simple tile-laying game. Tigris and Euphrates has one of my favorite point systems, and that's you're collecting 4 different types of points, but it is your lowest point value that ends up being your score. So I could have 100 red points and 2 black points, and my score would be 2. And so you really have to balance out gaining these points. And the way you gain points is by playing tiles of that color wherever that specific color of leader is controlling. There are these different sections of the board that will be built out as the game progresses, and you'll have different leaders of different colors in those sections, and only one leader of one color can be in there. So if yours and mine's green leader were both in there, we would have a little mini battle of sorts where we'd put up tiles from our hand, and the loser would get booted, and the winner would get points. And it's this really interesting tile-laying area control game that's really solid. And this was a really, really close match. It was an 11-10 vote with 3 people being undecided. And so what's been happening in the Discord when people are undecided or they're torn between two games, they've been throwing in a roll of the dice, the flip of the coin. So I roll a dice on my phone, and from 1 to 3, I give it to the first game. For 3 to 6, I give it to the second game. Luckily, the Die of Chaos respected the status quo of it being 11 to 10, and it ended up being a 13 to 11 vote for Great Western Trail. So Tigris and Euphrates is burned, and GWT moves on. Next up, we have Hallertau versus Teotihuacan. See, I got those names, no problem. Now, Hallertau is another game by Uwe Rosenberg. Again, you'll see a lot of the same similar designers because the more well-known Crunchy Euro games, or the Crunchy Euro games that even make it out of obscurity, are usually of a certain caliber. And it's usually from the same people producing the certain caliber. It's strange how that works. You don't see a lot of Crunchy Euros on Kickstarter, for example. There's a lot more thematic games or deck builders or battling card games, and not a lot of just pure strategy, because it takes a really, I think, a certain mind to create these sorts of games and make them work and make them balanced and make them replayable and fun. Now, Hallertau is, again, another themeless game of farming, but there's a couple differences that are exciting. It has progressive worker placement like Keyflower, where I can put something down and you can use that spot. You're not blocked, but you need to put more than me. So there still is a cost to it. The fields now have a sort of expiry date as they, rotate as the seasons go on, as the game goes on, it lessens. And the sheep also have an expiry date, which gets me really excited for some strange reason. That the sheep that you have, you can't just hold on to them for the full game, but there will be a life cycle to your sheep, and you will lose some sheep because they pass away. And actually, I don't know why I was excited about it. Saying it out loud makes me very sad for my fictional sheep that I've bonded with and become incredible friends with. Oh man. Let's talk about Teotihuacan. I've heard Teotihuacan is also a contender for best value game because it's got a lot of meat to the bones for not a huge price point. That's what somebody was saying on the best value games video that I recently did. And you're going to move your workers around this modular board that's shifted every game. That's what a modular board is. And every space you land, you'll have 2 actions. You'll have an action, and you can also upgrade your worker a bit, or you'll have a super powerful bonus action, but you won't get that upgrading worker. So I like this decision that you're going to be constantly making throughout the game. And basically, you're going to be trying to build this big pyramid in the center of the city until it reaches the sky. You'll play over 3 ages. You'll have to feed your people, and you try to build the best pyramid building crew. And this was a really close vote. I honestly expected Teotihuacan to take it in a landslide. It's sitting at 75 on Board Game Geek. Hallertau sitting at 235 for your reference. But there were a couple Hallertau fanatics who threw in their extra vote and managed to overtake Teotihuacan. The Sheep Lovers Anonymous Club remains strong, and I'm a proud member. And Hallertau moves forward in a very close 13 to 12 vote. Next up, we have Grand Austria Hotel versus Gaia Project. Again, 2 really fun games. I'm excited about both of these. Grand Austria Hotel, you're going to roll a number of dice, and each number on the dice corresponds with a different action that you can take. But whenever you take your action, you're drafting these dice, you get to take as many actions as there were the number rolled. So if I rolled 4 6s and 1 1, for example, I would get to take action number 6 4 times if I took something from the 6th row, instead of just the 1 time in the 1 row. But there's only 1 chance for me to take it from the 1 row. And so it's a really interesting push and pull as you try to meet the needs of your hotel patrons. You have to feed them, you have to give them what they want to eat at your cafe downstairs, and then you have to prepare a room for them corresponding with their color. There's red, blue, and yellow, and stick them in an open room, and they'll be happy until the cows come home. Or the sheep go to sleep. Gaia Project, however, is the answer to the question, what if Terra Mystica was in space? And that's pretty much what it is. There's been some improvements. The tech trees of Gaia Project feel a little bit more impactful than the cultist tracks in Terra Mystica. That's the word on the street. In addition, in Terra Mystica, you can only build on 1 space corresponding with your faction, but in this one, you can build on that 1 type of space, and you're still going to try to be switching them to that planet to make sure that you can inhabit that planet. But there's also Gaia planets where everybody can inhabit. And so that adds a little interesting twist to it as well. Both of these are in the top 100 in Board Game Geek. Grand Austria Hotel is 73. Gaia Project is number 9. If they could exist together, you might call them the Grand Battlefield Earth Hotel. But that only happens when Wes Anderson falls asleep listening to a podcast about Scientology and has a fever dream. Unfortunately, only one can survive, and this was a drama-filled vote. It was tied 13-13, then it was tied 14-14, people coming out for both sides, and at one point, when I was gonna call it, I would have called it before it was tied, but someone retracted their extra vote. They had placed it previously on Gaia Project, and then Gaia Project was ahead, and so they thought, nah, you know what? I don't need to spend my extra vote. I can save it. I can save it down the line. Maybe the next time Gaia Project's out there, I can use it to push Gaia Project ahead. It was a strategic play of a mastermind, but it was seen by another voter who retracted their vote to create the tie. And then the extra votes from Grand Austria Hotel poured in to sweep the competition and sweep Gaia Project out of contention. Grand Austria Hotel moves forward in a stunning upset and a 15-14 vote. Next round, we have the Gallerist versus Le Havre. And this is the last Vital Lacerda game in the bracket. Is Vital Lacerda going to go 3 for 3 and move on into the next round? It's up against tough competition, the third Uwe game in this bracket. The Gallerist is a game where you are attempting to cultivate artists, basically. Everyone is painting paintings, and you want to be the best curator of paintings. And so you're going to try to invite as many little meeples into your gallery as possible, and while at the same time supporting artists early on and then driving up the price on their works so you can sell them for a profit. Because there's nothing better than art for a profit. And it's very simple worker placement. There's really only 4 places you can go, and you can usually take 2 actions, one or the other, where you go in a place. But if you're in a spot, someone else can boot you out of there, and that's a benefit to you, because if they do, you get to take an additional action. So there's not a way to block people from going to places, but there's a way to benefit from if you know where the person is going to go next, if that makes sense. But Le Havre is also a gorgeously fun game. There are these 7 spaces on the board. You're going to play a number of rounds. There's always these 7 spaces, and they have different actions on them. And each person in turn will go on one of the 7 spaces. And because there are 7, that means every round there's going to be an odd number of turns. So some rounds you might get more turns, some rounds you might get less. And then after every kind of pass through, you're going to have to feed your workers or feed your workforce. And at the same time, you're going to try to build buildings, and you're going to try to gather ships so that you can have more food. I forget what the ships are used for, honestly. But they're very important, and that's how I won the game that I played. It's for the food. It is for the food. That's why I won, because I didn't need to worry about getting food from other sources, and I could just use those goods instead to sell them for points instead of eating them. It's the same sort of structure. If you have more cow and grain, they'll multiply as the game progresses because they grow or they breed. But yeah, it's a really solid game. Both again in the top 100. Gallerist is 61, Le Havre's 53, and with the most beautiful art as well. Gorgeous art that only Uwe Rosenberg games are known for, right? Actually, it's pretty cool. Someone in the Discord, their offspring, has been employed by Uwe Rosenberg for Uwe's foray into the space theme. That's a spoiler on his next game, but there's the cover art, and you can see the similarities. I would have voted for Le Havre if I got a vote. I don't. I just have to watch the chaos happen, and it is a Gallerist that moves forward in a very close 10-9 vote. Next round, we have Caylus versus Discworld Ankh-Morpork. And Caylus is a game that I own that I don't believe anyone will ever play with me again, because it's very, very mean. It's almost the father of worker placement, so to speak. But there's a twist, because there's this piece of garbage provost who the players can manipulate back and forth up along the trail. And if he's at a certain point on the trail, anyone who's placed their workers past him, they just don't get to take their action. They've just lost that action. They've lost the money that it spent to place their worker there. They've lost the time that it took. They've lost so much. It's so mean. And you're building part of the cathedral, and who cares about that? You're building the castle, but nobody cares. What really matters is when the provost screws you over, and I really like this sort of cutthroat game, but it's just awful. It's just like so despicably mean. And it's so fun, but nobody will play it with me ever again. Anyway, that one's up against Discworld Ankh-Morpork, which is themed as a Terry Pratchett game. It's also been rethemed now by a game called Nanti Narking, which, you know, now that I say it out loud, I do like it just as much. But this is designed by Martin Wallace, and it's all card driven. You're going to play a card, do what it says, try to control the board with your buildings and your minions. That's it. This is actually the lowest complexity in the tournament, but I thought it would be neat to include, even though there were others that are more complex. And it turns out I was right because it won in a 17-3 vote. Turns out everybody hates Caylus as much as everybody else does. Except for me. I think it's good. But I also think it's on fire. So, next round we have a Feast for Odin versus Lorenzo il Magnifico. And a Feast for Odin is again by Uwe Rosenberg. It's this big, huge worker placement game. There are like 60 different places you can go and get different things. And that's just obscene. You're also collecting these little polyomino shapes and you're making out a feast, a little table of deliciousness, because you got to feed everybody. Of course, it's called Feast for Odin, and it's an Uwe Rosenberg game. It wouldn't be incredibly frustrating without being unable to feed your people the entire time. But yeah, worker placement, lots of options, big and complex. What more do you need to know? Lorenzo il Magnifico is a game that I own and really, really enjoy. I think it's fantastic. It's worker placement as well. You're going to roll 3 dice to determine the value of these workers. And they're the value for everybody's workers, so nobody's at a handicap. But that does determine what spots on the board will even be open for people to pick. And so that little detail shifts things so much. You can go into one of these 4 towers and collect these different cards in order to elevate your engine, chain things together. The more production buildings you have, if you access it at one time, you can then go down the line. It's one of those games where every place feels so important to get to first, and you just can't. You can't. And so it's could be a really mean blocking game as well. I think I just like being mean. I'm just a mean, spiteful person at my core, really. A friend of mine, Reed, the designer of Vigilante, which was the first video I ever did on his channel, he got married recently, and I went to his wedding, and that was wonderful. And instead of a gift, I was going to purchase him the big box of Lorenzo il Magnifico, because he absolutely despises this game. We went back and forth, and he just hates it. He hates it so much, and I really, really enjoy it. And he thinks it's the most boring thing in the entire world. And so instead of purchasing Lorenzo, because that would be, not a good wedding gift, where, I just contributed money, the exact amount of money that it costs to purchase the Lorenzo big box. Which I don't like that there is the Lorenzo big box. I don't think you need that 5th player expansion. I think with the 5th player, that it's too many people. The little modules that it would give you seem fun. It gives you an extra tower and some extra cards, but I have a little mini expansion, and I rarely touch that as well whenever I'm playing it. So I just don't think you need that big box and all that content. So if you are interested in it, don't go for that, go for the other one. But it doesn't matter, because Feast for Odin, of course, won in a resounding 19-7 vote. We'll keep moving forward. I always take so long in this first segment, and I feel like I'm taking doubly because the games are so complex, so you're not going to get to know anything about these next 2, which is Praga, Caput, Regni versus Anachrony. Anyway, in Praga, Caput, Regni, you're in Prague and you're trying to please the king, and you have these 6 actions that you can always choose, but they're shifting in terms of the benefits that they give you, which is kind of a neat mechanic. Anachrony is by Mind Clash again, and it's just a fantastic, it's great. It's an awesome game. You're trying to get out of Dodge before the cataclysm happens, because you've received word from your time-traveling self in the future that something's going to go down and you need to peace out. So you're choosing between going out in your exosuits to various places on the board, or constructing new buildings and putting your workers in those buildings that you don't need an exosuit to access. You're also sending yourself stuff from the future, resources from the future to use, but you're going to have to repay it and send it back when you get to that point in the time stream, or else you'll create a temporal anomaly, and won't be good. It won't be good, and one of your buildings will explode, or one of your workers will just disappear because of your negligence. Both of these are very highly rated. Board Game Geek, 149 for Praga, Caput, Regni, and 45 for Anachrony, but Anachrony won in a landslide, 19-5. Sorry, Praga, Caput, Regni. I feel like it's a good game. I feel like this is the game that is not getting represented very well in this short amount of time. But we're moving on to the next round, which is Power Grid versus Brass Birmingham. And again, both of these games are great. I say that all the time. I really love this bracket. You can tell my preference for games by how excited this gets me. Power Grid is friggin' awesome. It's an economic game. I always describe Power Grid as, Power Grib. When you're gribbing around I always describe Power Grid as Math, the board game. That's, I think, the best way to describe it, because you're just trying to get these power plants on various cities, and your connections will cost you an amount, and you have to pay that amount to expand to other cities. So you're really just trying to find the optimal way of expanding while still producing the most power. But it's really so satisfying to do this auction mechanic where you're auctioning off the different types of power plants, which all use different resources and use them in different levels of efficiency. And so going for those strategies and just seeing who around the table is going for a garbage strategy, using literal garbage to power their plants, and who is going for a sensible, smart strategy of using coal. That's a shot to my friend Zach, who always goes for garbage and never wins. I think the garbage strategy does make sense though, so I don't know. Or maybe I'm just saying that so I can win our next game. Anyway, Brass Birmingham is played over 2 ages. It is now moved up to number 2 on Board Game Geek. It was number 3. It has overtaken the number 2 spot, which was probably Pandemic Legacy. I don't know how I feel about that. Brass is still really good though. You are trying to get the most points, and again, it's an economic sort of game where you're balancing your economy growth and your point growth. You'll have 2 ages. In the first ages, you'll build canals and as many level 1 buildings as you can. And then in the second age, you're going to build railways, and you need to use iron to build all of these railways. And that's tough because iron are usually only found at various ports. And it makes the construction of things and constructing a network where you are touching different resources really important. The kind of cool thing about this game is that every delivery requires a beer, of course, because you have to, bribe the people to take your garbage goods and give them a little bit of beer along the way. But beer and iron or coal or whatever it's called, they're placed on the map in specific spots by your competitors, and you can use them if you have access to them and are touching them. But when they're used, they get flipped over, and whenever a building is flipped over, aka the good is delivered or the goods are used up, they then count for points. They give you an economic boost, and they also give you a point boost. And if you happen to unlock those point boosts in the first age, they stay unlocked for the second age, and you get to double down on those points. On your turn, you'll always play a card, and you can usually build something in that city, or you can use that card to do different things. It's a really elegant, exciting game. Both my plays took me like 4 hours, but Power Grid is also really great. And you know what? People recognize that greatness. And could this be the biggest upset of the century with Brass Birmingham getting booted by Power Grid? It could be. It's not. But it was so close. Oh, it was so close. Brass moves forward in a 15-2 vote, but there was such a rally of power for Power Grid that was just very exciting. And I was hoping for the upset, but eventually some extra votes put Brass over the line. And it's disappointing, but I understand. Power Grid's so good. You gotta check it out. Yeah, it's still in the top 100 of board games on Board Game Geek, and there's a reason for that. And finally, next round, we have Russian Railroad versus Bounce Off. I'll get to Russian Railroads in a second, but I want to talk about Bounce Off. And the reason Bounce Off is in here, if you're new to the competition, it has been in previous death matches before, and it just snuck its way in here as well, because, hey, I can't help it. It's rated a 5 in complexity on Board Game Geek. It is. Don't go check it. If it's different on your computer, it's wrong. But for me, it was rated a 5. And I just think that speaks to the incredible physics that is required to understand Bounce Off. Bounce Off seems simple, right? You're bouncing balls into a grid to create different shapes. How could that possibly be complex? But it forces the players to do such complex spatial and physics-related mathematics in the blink of an eye, and yet it teaches us that thing as well. As we bounce, we calculate these angles, and we're constantly readjusting and running numbers and variables, and it just is one of the most complex games. Honestly, if Power Grid is math the board game, Bounce Off is better math the board game. See, Bounce Off is almost more than a game. Because when you get that perfect shot, you sink it right into the pocket, and you get that little card. You feel like a god. You feel like you are ascending ahead of the realm of mortals. And honestly, even comparing Bounce Off to these piddly little thinky sort of games that cannot get on its level is offensive. It's offensive to the Bounce Off name. It's offensive to the Bounce Off family. And I am happy to report that it has ascended beyond being Crunchy Euro to perfect game. It might be in a perfect game deathmatch, but it certainly doesn't exist here. So it is out of the competition, and instead we bring in the ringer, Russian Railroads versus Golem. And Golem, well, yeah, sure, let's talk about Golem. Golem is another game by Cranio Creations, by the Lorenzo Grand Austria Hotel Barrage team, or members of them. You're going to animate golems and run them around the city with your students running them around the city. It's from the Legend of the Golem of Prague, where Rabbi Lowe animated a golem to protect his people. And while I haven't played this one, there's also this sort of marble system with related to different actions, and it's a number of marbles in that action depends how strong that action is, and that really reminds me of Grand Austria Hotel. There's this sort of similarity there, but a different way of maneuvering things around the board. In Russian Railroads, you're competing to build the largest and most advanced railway network, and it's basic worker placement. You're going to be using your workers to upgrade various parts of your track. Your tracks will allow you to get to better places, or different machinery will allow you to be more efficient, that sort of thing. It doesn't matter, it's not even worth talking about. It lost worse than Praga Caput Regni as Golem moves forward in a 20-4 vote. And so that's the round of 16. Oof, that took a very long time. I'm gonna really speed through the rest of the tournament. Okay, the winner is, no, I almost said it too. Let's move right on to the round of 16, where we have Energy Empire versus Underwater Cities. And Energy Empire is the only one we haven't talked about it. It's the sequel to the Manhattan Project. It's actually called the Manhattan Project Energy Empire. And in it, you're building power plants instead of bombs, which honestly makes me not want to try Manhattan Project first and makes me want to try Energy Empire first, because I have both. I recently just picked up both because I've heard they're both great. But what's also neat is that you kind of have to balance the amount of pollution you're producing versus the industrial advancements that you can make. And if you're producing too much pollution, that's not going to be good for you. But it follows the same format as Manhattan Project, where you're going to place a worker to the main board, and then you're also going to be able to activate buildings on your own tableau. But it's against Underwater Cities, which, if you remember, is that card placement where you're trying to match the color outside the ring. This was a really close one as well. I honestly expected Underwater Cities to sweep it, but there was a lot of support for Energy Empire and a lot of support for the designer, who actually is Luke Laurie, who designed Dwellings of Eldervale as well. So I think that helped push Energy Empire a bit forward, and we had a couple clutch extra votes that send Energy Empire on into the next round, and Underwater Cities just burning in an underwater fire. Let's keep it moving. Next round, we have Trickerion versus Lisboa, the Caverna killer versus the clan's cooker. Will Vital Lacerda continue his reign of terror, sweeping out every member of the competition? Well, no. Actually, no. It is Trickerion that moves forward in a really solid 18-6 vote. I don't know why I didn't draw it out that much. Oh yes, I do remember, because this video is crunchy enough as it is. As Kenneth Branagh would say, it's just like magic! As Vital Lacerda's first game burns, and his hopes rest on only 2 that are remaining. Trickerion, however, moves forward towards the quarterfinals. Next up, we have Pax Pamir versus Barrage. 41 versus 35 on Board Game Geek. And really, that's exceptional. Both of these games being that high in the standings. How do you compare the two, really? Do you prefer that area control aspect of it, or do you prefer that diverting water, pre-planning the routes aspect? And there was lots of love for Pax Pamir, manipulating the different factions that exist in the world, building up tension, the closed economy, quick turns, a tight market. There's lots of things that make people want Pax Pamir to not be burned, but unfortunately, none of those landed. And it is Barrage that continues its assault in a 12-10 vote. Next round, we have Vinhos versus Great Western Trail. Yeah, it's staying like that. Oh, I hope Great Western Trail wins here so I can stop saying it. And Great Western Trail is such a fun game. Choosing which type of worker to invest in, the cowboys letting you purchase cows easier, the builder letting you build more buildings to shift the map, consistently change the spots that are available on the board for you and not for your opponents, just kind of delaying them if you put them in the right spot. Or the train master, who just helps you with your trains. But you have the variable phase order, which wasn't in my Board Game Geek listing of mechanics for Vinhos. It's Portuguese, so it's probably Vinhos. We're going with Vinhos. Anyway, the variable phase order just basically means that each round something different might happen, like Puerto Rico, basically. And throw that in with your area majority and worker placement mechanics that you also have for Vinhos. Anyway, it is the Vinhos that take out the cows in a 14-11 vote. Next round. Moving along, we have Hallertau versus Grand Austria Cat Tau. Speaking of cat in a box, my cat's in a box. This one was pretty obvious to me. I expected Grand Austria Hotel to really win this outright, and it did, but there was still a lot of support for Hallertau, and it makes me want to play it. There's actually a lot of elements of Hallertau that do get me quite excited that I never expected to get excited about because of its boring generic theme that Uwe Rosenberg throws on every game, and Agricola is more well known. Really, that's my reason for not caring whatsoever about Hallertau. But it is Grand Austria Hotel that does move forward in a 15-10 vote. I said I'd speed it up. Let's keep it going. Next up, we have the Gallerist versus Discworld Ankh-Morpork. And the Gallerist is probably my favorite Vital Lacerda game because it's the only one I've played. Yeah, it's my favorite. I'll just cut that other part out. Make you think I've played them all. There's a really interesting elegance in design that happens with the Gallerist. I don't really know Discworld. I know it's not that crunchy, so I know it's not going to win. And the Discworld. Discworld moves forward in a stunning upset over the Gallerist. This just in. And actually, it was the closest vote. Huge turnout. Huge voter turnout. It was a 15-14 vote, with some extra votes for Discworld. Extra votes on both sides, actually. And maybe it's, representing Martin Wallace in the competition, as he did design Discworld, or maybe people just don't like the Gallerist. Honestly, I do really enjoy the Gallerist, but I also enjoy Le Havre more, I think. I think I enjoy, like, a few of the ones from the first round more than the Gallerist. While it is nice and crunchy, I think there are still other ones that I enjoy more. So I'm fine seeing Discworld move forward. And that's an upset for me. The least complex in the competition taking out a Vital Lacerda feels like people might care a little bit more about theme and hate the crunch. But you never know. I guess we'll see what happens in the subsequent rounds, which are happening right now with a Feast for Odin versus Anachrony. This feels like a really big showdown. A Feast for Odin is regarded, honestly, I think, as one of Uwe's best games. It's certainly his highest rated at 22, versus Anachrony's spot on 45 in the Board Game Geek top rankings. Both are worker placement. Anachrony has a few less worker placement decisions and is more about deciding what buildings you're going to build. Anyway, it was a tough match. A lot of votes came out again. Lots of voters turning up to weigh in. And it is Anachrony that moves forward in a pretty dominant 19-10 vote. Next round, we have Brass Birmingham versus Golem, the surprise entry into this competition. Brass being that lovely two-tiered age system, the Canal Age and the Industrial Age. Golem being with those marbles that help elevate the actions and moving your students and the golems around on board. Not to be outdone by the previous match, one more vote was cast in this one, and it ended up being a 20-10 vote for Brass Birmingham, which moves on into the quarterfinals. That's it. We're already at the final 8. We have 8 brave competitors that are vying for a spot in the top 4 and the champion of all Crunchy Euros, and 2 of those competitors are Energy Empire versus Trickerion. That's our first matchup right now. Energy Empire is soaring on the backs of Luke Laurie, and really the scientific method used to determine these is what can they be spelled anagrammically, which, yes, that is a word. Do you want in it corker or me peeing rye? Both of those sound very unpleasant, and I think I should just disqualify both from the competition. These were the arguments that some people were using to vote, or to sway voters, rather. But this one was really close. Unfortunately, there weren't enough extra votes to send Energy Empire forward, and it is Trickerion that moves forward into the quarterfinals in a 14-13 vote. My cat really wants someone to play with him. So let's move this along. Next round, we have Barrage versus Vinhos. This is Lacerda's last horse in the competition, and it is going to be stomped out right now by a barrage of votes. This one was actually really close. I had to extend the voting time. Usually, it takes me about 24 hours for everything to tabulate, or before we move on to the next round, but we had to move on to the next round because there was so much debate happening. And so this one was tied. They were both tied 13-13. I had to move on to the next one, but eventually it was Vinhos that ends up booting Barrage down the river in a 15-13 vote. And speaking of the next round, we have Grand Austria Hotel versus Discworld Ankh-Morpork. I feel like this is the end of the road for Discworld. There's no way that it's going to be able to surpass Grand Austria Hotel, which also is kind of on the lower complexity level, at least relative to the entries in this competition. I don't think Martin Wallace can stand a chance. It has to be Grand Austria Hotel that's moving forward, because it's just a really fun game. But there is this ineffable quality to Ankh-Morpork. Not only does it have the word pork in it, but to quote a wise man, Ankh-Morpork is as full of life as an old cheese on a hot day, as loud as a curse in a cathedral, as bright as an oil slick, as colorful as a bruise, and as full of activity, industry, bustle, and sheer exuberant busyness as a dead dog on a termite mound. And Discworld moved forward in a 14-13 vote, just edging out Grand Austria Hotel. And what I think is one of the biggest upsets in this tournament. Discworld has been the upset king, and perhaps that will continue, perhaps it won't. Only time will tell. Its competitor will be one of these two in the next round, Anachrony versus Brass Birmingham. And honestly, this could have been a final matchup. These two are so good. I really enjoy both of them. I don't know which way I would vote. I think I would end up voting for the inevitable winner of this matchup, but it was really close, and it would be really close for me as well. I really like both of them. And this one was close. It was tied 15-15. And then I checked the extra votes, and I noticed that quite a few for one side had already used their extra votes on previous entries and were ineligible to use their extra votes again, and that took away points from Brass, sending Anachrony forward in an official 14-12 vote. Yeah, 3 sneaky cheaters, 4 of them. I see you. Nothing gets past me, except actually one did get past me, and I'm not going to tell you which one it was, but I went back and I checked when I noticed, and it didn't affect anything, so don't worry. The integrity of the competition is still sound. So we have our final 4. We are here with Trickerion, Vinhos, Discworld, Ankh-Morpork, and Anachrony. Those are our 4 brave competitors competing for the best Crunchy Euro title of all time. It seems like such an odd 4 to me, honestly. I was expecting maybe one of them. I think I was expecting one of them. I wasn't expecting any of the other ones to actually make it here. But they've done it, and let's figure out who moves on to the finals. In this round, there are no more extra votes. Once you make it to the quarterfinals, all bets are off. All extra votes are gone, and it must be won on pure merit, and that's what we have right now. Trickerion versus Vinhos, Mind Clash versus Eagle Griffin, Mind Clash's team versus Lacerda. And this one was pretty close. I expected, I think, Trickerion to win, mainly because not because Vinhos isn't well regarded, but I think because Lacerda's other games are more well regarded, and people felt that sting that they weren't included in this competition, in this bracket, in this tournament. And that is what happened. Trickerion does move forward into the finals with a poof of magic in a 14-10 vote. On the other side of things, we have Discworld Ankh-Morpork versus Anachrony, and I think Discworld could pull off the upset here. I'm worried because I want to keep my copy of Anachrony and not have to burn it, or not have it spontaneously combust, rather. You don't have to burn them. They'll burn themselves. They just will. It'll happen. I'm just warning you so that you can get them out of your house and get yourself into a fireproof room. Yeah, put yourself into the fireproof room first, and then just leave your games in the rest of your house. Sorry, there's only one room that's fireproof. I don't make the rules. But the fact that Discworld has gotten so far really makes me want to try Nanti-narking, even though, you go back and forth. When you think one thing, it sounds great, and then when you have to repeat it, it just sounds like the worst thing in the world. That must be a reference to something. I'm sure Board Game Geek could tell me, but I bet one of you will do a better job of it. Anyway, it's a showdown for the century, and one of them does come out on top. And it is Anachrony that dethrones the usurper, that kicks out the black pork of this competition, and Anachrony does move forward in a solid 19-10 vote. And so we have our final matchup between Trickerion and Anachrony. 2 games by Mind Clash Games. I did not see this coming. I thought Grand Austria Hotel might make it. I thought Brass might make it. I thought Gaia Project might make it. I even thought Underwater Cities or Energy Empire might take it. Maybe even the Gallerist. Maybe even all of the other things I expected to be here other than these 2. Well, actually, I did kind of expect Anachrony to be here. Part of me thinks that there was some weird loop in the space-time continuum that really would explain how it got there. I think Trickerion, might have gotten there also by the use of its illusions. I honestly don't think either of these should be in here. Maybe we should just give it to Dice Throne Adventures, right? But there's no time for that. There's no time to meddle with the time stream or pull out tricks. And there's no time to meddle with the time stream. And again, there's no time to meddle with the time stream. And like I've said before, there will be no time shenanigans allowed in this deathmatch. Okay, just ignore that. There's not going to be any time shenanigans allowed in this deathmatch. I need you both to settle down, okay? There's no time shenanigans happening here in this. That's what I just said. There's no time shenanigans allowed in this. We're not clones, okay? We're from the future. Or the past. Or the past. Or in the present. 2 places at once. 3. Okay. See you in the next one. And there's no time to meddle with the time. Wait a minute. What's going on? That's not. One of these games got 14 votes. The other got 8. And the game that won, this is where the time stream splits, right? This is where you do the separation and the two games that happen. That's not what happened. There is no separation of time stream. There are no temporal anomalies here. Only pure crunchy Euro goodness, and that means that the 14-8 vote winner is Anachrony. Anachrony wins the competition in a landslide. Well, not a landslide, but a pretty decently solid vote. They took down whatever the heck Praga Caput Regni is. They took out Feast for Odin. They dethroned Brass Birmingham, the #2 board game of all time. They took out the underdog, the black pork of the competition, Discworld Ankh-Morpork. And then finally, they dethroned their Mind Clash competitor and emerged victorious. I friggin' love Anachrony. I think this game is so well deserving to win the Crunchy Deathmatch competition. This is a game that as soon as you play, you'll want to play again, but you won't have the time to do so because it'll take you a long or large amount of time. I've been really enjoying playing this game. It is one that I want to keep on playing, and I'm annoyed when I'm not playing it. I really do. I really am enjoying Anachrony. Oh, I'm not enjoying it enough to get out of my chair and get it, though. That's it. Congratulations to Anachrony for being the best definitive Crunchy Euro of all time. If anybody says differently, you direct them to this video, and I'm sorry, I don't make the rules. This is the definitive answer. Anachrony is the best. Now we know. And it doesn't have to compete with all those other games because you know what? They're all on fire. They're spontaneously combusting right now. Don't look behind you. Just, turn your head away from it and it'll probably be okay. Thank you everybody for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this deathmatch recap. If you're interested in participating in the voting, feel free to join the Patreon at the lowest level, whatever. That'll get you access to our Discord, and that will allow you to participate in the voting. This way you can make sure that your games, your specific games, your best games can emerge victorious and be shown in the light that they are so deserving to be shown. And not burn as well, which is a pretty big draw. If you can, it helps support the channel. It helps me spend as much time as I do on the channel and on these sorts of videos. And if not, that's okay. I will always be producing these recaps because I think it's fun to relive the tournament journey that we experienced over the month. And also, I want people who are not able to financially support the channel, which is totally okay, to be able to participate in the fun and comment down below as well. So yeah, comment if you think Anachrony is a deserving winner, who you wanted to see win, who are the snubs. I'm interested in all of that. Next month's deathmatch at the beginning of October will be the spooky, scary deathmatch of the century. We decided to vote on the spooky, scary games so that they are prevalent in October so that you can all know which games to play for the spookiest season of them all. Thanks so much for tuning in. My name's Chris George. I do not have a catchphrase. I almost said I do not have a deathmatch, but I do. I have 8 of them, and soon there will be 9. Thanks for tuning in. This one was long, but I appreciate you sticking around. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't. It really helps a lot. At least that's what they tell me, and I'm gonna keep repeating it like some weird person who eats mints every time they hear a bell. It just seems like the right thing to do. Bye.